I'm going to do all the review portion stuff at the end of the video and get right into the painting, because despite the few hurdles I had, I think this ended up being one of my favorite things I've painted on this whole watercolor journey so far. That being said, here's my reference photo. I try to find the photographer because I hate it when people upload to Pinterest with no link to where it came from, but all the reverse image search revealed was that a lot of people have photographed this little house in Scotland. Also, I have a cold and I'm sure you could probably tell. Bear with me. Anyways, I've been playing with gouache so much lately that when I got back to the watercolor, there was like this instant pleasant relief watching it move on the paper. It was very much a, ah yes, hello old friend kind of experience. That being said, I've never been a purist with any medium, and I think most people aren't, but they are out there. I'm a potter, and there's a lot of ceramic purists out there. And I've seen people make snobby comments regarding anyone using a bit of gouache in their watercolor, especially when using it for white instead of letting the paper itself be the white. Well, those people will probably be aghast when I pull out the acrylic paint markers here in a minute. And that's too bad, because I think watercolor and paint pens might be a freaking awesome match. I wanted to lay down a base of watercolor first though, so let's do that. I think the fact that acrylic doesn't stay water soluble once it's dry makes it a good candidate to start with first if you wanted to, because you're not going to move it with the watercolor. I'm just not so sure, well, for one, how well the watercolor would look or move on top of the acrylic. I've honestly not experimented with that yet, but even if it manages to look pretty cool that way, I'm not so sure how the watercolor would bind to the acrylic when it's just sitting on top, like long term. I think you'd risk it coming off. That's not something I'd be concerned about the other way around, though, going on top of the watercolor with acrylic. Also, I wanted to use the markers for details and hopefully have it complement the watercolor, so that's another reason I decided to go in with the watercolor first and get it all blocked out. Also, this way I can see where I get some nice effects and color bleeds and all that good watercolory stuff, and hopefully have enough restraint later to not go overboard with the markers and just cover that all up. There's definitely a balance to be had here. I think that was my biggest anxiety going into this. And I gotta tell ya, I don't completely nail that here, I think, but I'll talk about it along the way. If you watched some of my videos before, you might recall me discussing how my hands gravitate to making things look a lot more illustrative than my brain wants, and constantly battling that. My very stubborn brain wants some kind of blend between a moody realism and slightly abstracted expressionism, I guess. And I'm thinking I might just let go of that, at least a little, and see what happens. I was thinking about that a lot when I painted this, because the acrylic markers are something that really lends itself to a more illustrative kind of art. I still want my work to be much more on the painterly side of things, but I think if I stop fighting my hands so much, maybe I can find a balance. I really tried to limit how many of these markers I was going to use for this to keep things cohesive, but then I just kept grabbing more and more. Oh well. Some of the lighter colors in this set aren't as opaque as I'd like with just one layer, but the white still does a pretty good job at letting me put the structure back into this little house. No pun intended. I really wasn't sure when I should stop with the watercolor and pick up with the markers. Like, should I go ahead and do all the darker values with the watercolor and just do highlights and pops of color with the markers? But then I worried that wouldn't be enough of a balance between the two and maybe be more subtle than I wanted. So I went in with the markers to fill in all the dark details of the trees behind the house, and I think it worked out really well. I'm not so sure I really love all the marks I'm making in the background. I probably could have slowed down and been a little more intentional. I think it works great in the foreground, but maybe not quite the right marks and lines for the mountain. I don't know. I really like that more subtle color, but I'm not sure about the rest. But hey, it's called a sketchbook for a reason. This is where I do think things start going a little wrong, though. It's all hindsight, obviously, but I wish I would have done most of the mountain details with watercolor, and instead I kind of really went overboard trying to draw in mossy cliffs with the markers, and it gets to be a bit much. It's just hard when I know the mountain is in the background and doesn't need to show every detail, right? But also I kinda did wanna show a lot of detail because I wanted to show how huge this mountain hillside is behind the house. I intentionally made the house smaller in my composition than it is in the reference photo for that reason, so I had a hard time knowing how much detail to add to the mountain because of that. And then I try to add in the rocks. And look, I never sat down and really practiced rocks like I said I would. I haven't. They're kind of my nemesis, and clearly I need to work on that. Because while I do end up loving this piece overall, I really make a mess of this part. And it really doesn't help that I was way too obsessed with the reference photo when I really just needed to look at the painting and assess what it needed, because it didn't need this. Even if I had just left it there, it would have been okay, but nope. I decided maybe some like gouache would help those rocky cliffs pop. Maybe it would have if I had used it sparingly, but I just kept on going. I did take a break to add more highlights to the water, but then I came back to the mess and made it worse. Adding some darker values with the markers, like with that gray, did help though. I will say it painted on top of the gouache just fine, which is awesome. Good to know. You know what I think I'm going to do with the next few pages of this sketchbook? I'm going to practice rocky cliffs. Yep, that's what I'm going to do. Hold me to it, guys. Anyways, despite my constant rock struggles, this really did end up being one of my favorite things I've painted in a really long time. It's really given me some inspiration to move forward with, and I'm looking forward to it. Let me tell you about the markers, because I'm kind of obsessed with them. Arrtx sent these over to me, and holy crap, that is a huge set. I rearranged them by color. They didn't come this way. Anyone else love arranging colors obsessively over and over again? Anyways, they came with corresponding stickers for each color, and I guess you can either put those on the markers themselves or maybe into a sketchbook if you want. This is the order they came in originally. I'll show you what I did with the stickers, because you know the caps of markers hardly ever actually match the color of the marker. So I used the marker to paint the sticker, and then I put that on the marker so that I could always see the actual color. To Arrtx's credit, they've actually color matched their caps to the actual paint color pretty closely. Some are off a little bit, but for the most part, a lot of them are really close, so kudos to Arrtx. If you do this, make sure you put some Scotch tape over the whole thing, because unfortunately the paint does scratch off of the sticker. They also sent this watercolor sketchbook, which I really like. It's probably one of my favorite I've used so far. It's really pretty. And I also put all the paint marker swatches on the inside cover in numerical order that they originally came in. Look at that. The spine is not connected to the pages, so it can lay much flatter while you're using it than a regular sketchbook. They have several sizes, and they all have slightly different patterns and colors on the cover, but they're all 100% cotton, 300 gram, 140 pound paper. Most of them are hot press paper though. This seems to be the only size that comes in cold press. I prefer cold press paper for the texture, so I think that's my biggest gripe, is wishing all of the sizes came in either paper that you wanted. There's no pocket in the back, which I don't mind personally. I never use it. The cover itself is kind of a pocket though, so that's cool. Anyways, back to the markers. Even though these are paint pens, you don't have to shake them up, like, at all. And you don't have to work the paint into the tip. You literally just open the marker and start using it. They have a cotton brush shaped tip, and it has a really fine point on it, but it's a little soft, so if you want to draw with a super fine line, it takes some control. They do have a ton of other acrylic markers on their website, including ones with much finer tips, and some with really big tips, which I think is pretty awesome. I still need some practice with that. Someone more skilled than me could probably do lettering with these, but I am not one of those people, so don't judge them by my lack of skill. I'm just scribbling on this page to show you how they flow, and this first page of the sketchbook is just regular paper, so that's why you can see some pilling. That's not an issue at all with the actual watercolor paper and the rest of the book. The flow has been really nice. I've not had any issues with the paint flow at all. I don't know how long each marker lasts, though. I've been messing with them a lot for about a month, but not with any super heavy use, so unfortunately I can't speak to longevity. But I've not had any dry out on me so far, so that's promising. Like I mentioned earlier, some are more opaque than others, but with a couple of built-up layers, they all do pretty well on opacity. I do wish you could buy individual colors to replace the ones you've used up though, or build your own set. If Arrtx would incorporate that, they would be goated immediately. I did use them to decorate the cover of one of my other little sketchbooks, and it worked out wonderfully and went on well, and so far is holding up well too, even on the part where the strap rubs. Here's a couple less successful experiments while using these with watercolor on some scrap watercolor paper. I did the line work first here and painted in the leaves after. It's kind of a mess, but it has potential. I think with slightly different color choices and some practice, you could make something really fun like this. And on the back of that was my first attempt at laying down watercolor first and then using the markers for details. A bit of a mess, but I just wanted to show you some of the initial experiments I was doing, for better or for worse. And that's it. I think these pair with watercolor really well. I think they would also be amazing to use with gouache for obvious reasons. They're both a very similar quality. Let me know what you think, and let me know if you've used any mixed media with your watercolors yet. Would you use? Tell me all the things. There's a link to all the goodies in the description, and I'm gonna get out of here. Maybe practice some rocks. Keep your brushes out of your beverage, and I will see you next time.